Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and taking the time to join us. I'm Jordana Jarrett, editor here at the Webby Awards. I'm coming to you live from Brooklyn. Last month, we launched this virtual event series, Unpacked, as part of a long-term partnership with the NAACP. Just to give you a little bit of background, it's a three-part series, and in each episode, we're bringing together thought leaders, creators, and scholars to explore issues impacting Black communities online. Part of our goal is to unpack these issues and provide insights and action steps that we can all take into our lives and build a more equitable internet. Today, we're talking about the digital divide, so the gap between individuals who are afforded access to the internet and technologies and those who aren't, and how it impacts Black communities in a few ways. Just to put some of this into context, 1 in 3 Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students lack high speed internet access at home, and they're more likely than white students to be disconnected from online learning. Obviously, this is an issue that we're going to get into today. And over the past 2 years of the pandemic, it's really shed a light on how critical this part of infrastructure really is, because the internet equals access and opportunity. And when young Black people don't have this access, it really sets them back. It's not just a short term issue, it's something that creates a perpetuating cycle that also compounds with other structural issues that they face that work to stifle their achievement. And so, it's a really big issue, and we hope to get into this today. Okay, enough of me talking. Today, I'm joined by two amazing panelists for our conversation. Lynae Vanee, who is a poet, activist, and educator, and Dr. Ivory Toldson, Director of Education Innovation and Research at the NAACP. And just to set the premise, there will be a chance for Q&A at the end. So please add your questions in the chat feature as we go, and we'll be sure to circle back to them. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. So before we start, could you please introduce yourselves and a bit about the work that you do? Lynae, if you could go first.
Absolutely. So, yes, my name is Lynae Vanee. I am currently a social media influencer and content creator. I got my start on 2020 with my NAACP Image Award nominated show, Parking Lot Pimpin'. And that is where I use my academic background in African American studies to give a lens of what's going on in the world from the perspective of those who are Black and women and queer and all the things. Just making sure inclusivity is key in my presentation. Using that degree in African American Studies, using that background from the HBCU to give a real homegirl feel to communicate the tough
Mm.
topics in a way that everybody loves and understands. So, yeah, that's about a bit what I do now.
All right, thank you so much. And Ivory?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivory Toldson. I'm currently the National Director of Education, Innovation, and Research for the NAACP. I'm also a professor in the School of Education at Howard University and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education. Prior to coming to the NAACP, I spent 5 years as the president of the QEM Network, which is an organization that advances STEM equity and STEM education among underrepresented minorities, primarily through our work with HBCUs. I also served the Obama administration as the executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs, where I led initiatives to expand federal support to HBCUs.
All right. HBCUs representing on this call. I mean,
Woo,
not
woo.
myself, but yes, come on, let's go. All right, so just to get into it, I'm going to start off, talking about the digital divide broadly with the impact during the pandemic. So, Lynae, prior to the work that you're doing now, you were a high school educator until the fall of 2020. Since the start of the pandemic, lack of access to tech, coupled with a move to virtual learning, has really taken a toll on both students and educators.
Yeah.
As someone who was teaching during the height of the pandemic, did you see this impact on your students or your work? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. Many students fell through the cracks, unfortunately. Like some students
Mm.
fell behind, and then some kids just fell off the board altogether. many schools face the challenge of having to go like cold turkey, so to speak, to go directly to all digital platforms from their in-person platforms without the luxury of having that in-person training for teachers and also in-person training for students, giving that hand-on, this is what we're going to be doing from now on. We didn't get that opportunity. And so with that came so many students with challenges of figuring out how to work the software, and then kids who might not have even had a device to work with the software on. So there was the tech inequity in one, the knowledge and training absent from the process of migrating to tech-based classrooms, and then also the challenge of students having the ability to enter classrooms and be present in school, and so greatly impacting their learning ability. Yeah, and then we think about our friend systemic injustice, like there's just so many things that go into kids' learning processes being inhibited or restrained because not only do they not have access or not have the ability to work these platforms smoothly, to get in assignments on time and all that, but also there's not really people at home to help them. They are maybe sharing computers with their younger brothers and sisters who are also school age, but mom and dad who can't afford these things are likely essential workers and not at home to provide that support or even answer teacher phone calls. So it was a lot, man. Like a lot of challenges the student faced and teachers faced trying to make sure students were okay. You know, I myself, there were several students on my roster that I just literally never heard from the beginning of the year into the end. And then, you know, I definitely remember that there were things teachers had to stop doing, you know, just out of fairness to the students. We can't assign as much work, just to try to make it equitable across students with different abilities, but also having to pass students based on, and it's not even like a having to pass as if we didn't want to, but knowing that kids did not get the instruction that they needed and are now having to move to the next grade without that preparation, without the necessary knowledge to move on. And so it was very difficult for teachers and students alike at the height of the pandemic, and a lot of teachers left. I was one of them, but you know, everybody had their reasons.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Ivory, in a similar vein, what are the most significant ways that you've seen tech inequity impact Black students, both prior to and during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand technology as a problem and a solution. So, on the one hand, we have these huge inequities in terms of access, and I think we can look at the inequities in two categories. One is inequity in access to the tools, and the other is inequity in access to the knowledge. They both play out differently. Lynae did an excellent job talking about all of the problems associated with this happening and the time that it happened. One of the things that we should consider is that if this pandemic happened, let's say in 2002 or 2000 instead of 2020, we wouldn't have had any access to any ways of keeping the kids even partially engaged. Every district dealt with this differently. Some districts did a horrible job of mitigating this. Um, Washington D.C. is where I am, and I have two children in public schools here. I would say that Washington D.C. I would give them at least a B plus. Nobody's perfect, but they did seem they kept the issue of technology to the forefront. So they made a commitment. If your child needs a computer, we have a computer for them. If you have 5 children, we have 5 children for you, and we will make sure that everybody has access to broadband. Now it's easy to do that in a city that's like 12 square miles. Easier to do that there than like say Georgia. But one of the things that I think that illustrated is when students had the technology, they were able to be very effective. And in fact, there were some students found advantages in online education over being in the classroom, particularly those students that had a lot of difficulties with traditional public schools as it's constructed. These are students with disabilities, students who live further away from the school, and a lot of Black children, they commute a lot longer than other children, because there's this idea that you have to leave your neighborhood in order to go to a better school. So you take commuting out of it. A lot of students that had social anxiety, a lot of students who didn't have good clothes to wear. Uh, it was a lot of burdens that was taken away. And then I think in the long term, if we expand the use of technology, it can reprioritize what we think of as a good teacher. Right now we think of good teachers as the smartest teachers, the teachers that can retain the most information about their subject and recite it back to students. That's archaic because we have computers that can do that now. So if we have robust computer modules that's helping us to teach students, then maybe we can think about teachers who care about students, teachers who have empathy, teachers who understand cultural differences, teachers who know how to ease a student and calm a student down when they're stressed. These are things that we don't really look at in the teacher training, certification, evaluation right now, because we've been so laser focused on how smart they are. Pass this national certification test so we can demonstrate how smart you are. Go to this kind of college, get these kinds of grades. So I think we need to understand these disparities, but also look at the opportunities that technology can bring.
Agreed.
Very much agreed. And I want to get more into that, but I'm hoping we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Lynae, I'm hoping that you could also, put some of these issues into context. So although we touched on this a bit, what are some of the other factors that leave Black students more vulnerable to tech inequity? And kind of like, where does the onus fall on, the remedy for these issues, whether it's school districts, teachers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think Ivory touched on this on accessibility in a great way, but I think the other issue is also affordability, especially when we think about the people most affected by tech inequity are low-income families, Black or brown. Otherwise, it's low-income families don't have access to those things, and we could say the onus is on the school board, it's on departments, it's on legislators who determine how much school districts are getting budgets for, But at the end of the day, if we're talking about affordability and accessibility, then the onus is really up to those corporations and the legislators who can either do one of two things. If those are the two problems, they can either pay these essential workers more, and or people from who work in low income jobs, raise the minimum wage, pay them more, and or make this technology less expensive. And there can be a lot of excuses when it comes to corporations and legislators as to why they can't make those things happen. But the solutions as they are still falling short. I also remember at the top of the pandemic, as Ivory was saying, in DC, they made sure the students had laptops. Technology within itself, tech inequity was already an issue prior to the pandemic. And so when we have to make this switch to cold turkey, it's so cold turkey digital platforms, it's so difficult to get kids to transition to these things because they're not even used uniformly throughout the school, because we already know kids don't have all the same access. I myself taught a tech and society class, and while it didn't have a curriculum per se, I used that class to get kids to use their phones or whatever at their disposal to talk about societal issues. I even had students who couldn't complete my assignments because they didn't have cell phones with internet access. And I was like, wow, really? Like that was something that shocked me. Like I assumed all kids had access to TikTok, and that just wasn't the case. So now then we make this switch. We have these people who are now coming up saying, we'll get all the kids tablets, going back into their backlogs of technology that's never been used because it hasn't been a priority in the past. And so you're passing out tablets that don't work. And why do we have tablets that don't work? Because different nonprofit agencies and government funding are so particular on how they spend money in schools and low-income schools. I had the opportunity, my first school to work in was a Title IX school. Because they reached Title IX status, they had so much access to new technology, to iPad cards, to all of these things, and it was a low-income school. I worked at another school that had an equal amount, well, not an equal amount because those are the technical differences to reach Title IX qualifications, but it has a lot to do with how many students receive free and reduced lunch. And because they fell right under the threshold of that amount of students, we still have the same type of children with the same lack of access, unable to get funding for the school because they had a certain amount of kids who could afford lunch, who looked like they were above certain income brackets as far as family income. So these technicalities still are disturbing students in a big way. So when we think about it, at the end of the day, it does go back to how can corporations make this stuff more accessible, more affordable, or how can they work with communities to donate this kind of stuff to increase equity in the people that are leaving these neighborhoods to pour back into these neighborhoods. There's such a long string, but at the end, I think it goes to those two.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned legislators, we didn't get to touch on them as much, but legislators, in as much as once again how much teachers are getting paid, because how much teachers get paid is a reflection of the budgets for these school districts and requirements for these students to be able to have technology. Period. Because as Ivory was saying earlier, there's going to come a time where kids can't learn without technology.
Right. And that's coming very soon. And so, Ivory, I just wanted to ask, talking about how much technology is needed. You've kind of already covered this a bit, but based on the research and work that you do, how much does access to broadband and technology factor as a success indicator for specifically Black students? And maybe not just the bare minimum, but even if there's research on other programs that and other access, really having that access, how much of a success indicator is it?
Yeah, well, it gets into, that fundamental question of whether technology is a right or a luxury. And, I think we would all agree that it's a right. Every student should have the right to technology, and there should be no assumption that a student would be able to adequately compete in their classes if they don't have the technology that they need. So every student needs that. There was a survey that showed that Black students use mobile smartphone apps more than any other race. But that's probably because they don't have desktops or laptops in their home. And so you have students that are doing entire papers on a smartphone because the smartphone is the most powerful device there. Um, at the same time, the smartphones that we have right now are more powerful than the most powerful computer that was around during the Apollo mission. So we all have these very powerful devices in our pockets, um, and there's typically this period where technology comes out and only a handful of people can afford it. But technology is a commodity that tends to get cheaper as it gets better, and that can't be said for anything else. So it's we always have to take the good with the ugly. Um, but there's there's two things that I'm concerned about. One is the access to the tools. The other is the access to the knowledge. And just like I believe that technology should be a right insofar as what kids have or what students have at their disposal, it should also be a right in terms of what they're learning in school. I believe that computer science should be a required course. I believe every student needs computer science. Just like there was a point where we decided that every student needed English,
Mm.
and then we decided that every student needed math. And then
Right.
there's other subjects that we decided that every student needs. Computer science is one of those classes that students need. There's one project that I was involved with QEM that used HBCUs as hubs, as training hubs for teachers to be certified to teach computer science. And then the rationale for that, what I found was that although although Black people are about 13% of the U.S. population, we're only 7% of the computer science workforce. And if you look at that 7%, 21%, the majority of the Black computer science professionals, 21% is the highest percentage of the different categories for Blacks. They're computer support specialists. So we're more likely to be computer support specialists. Only 4% of us are software developers. And when we look at all of the software developers, only 4% are African American, 60% are white, and 32% are Asian. So we're seeing in our schools where they're not giving access to computers, they're not teaching computer science classes, they're creating a wealth gap and a knowledge gap in the profession. So these are things that we have to do something about.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something that you said earlier, Ivory, because you did ask earlier, Jordana, about other things that play into this tech inequity for kids as far as systemic injustices go. But even just thinking about kids having to do work on their cell phones, the ergonomics of that affecting their bodily health and physical health long term, and even their vision. Working on these phones tonight, they're going to look at their phones anyway, but having the additional pressure of having to type these papers on their phone, having to lean over to do all of this research, it's things that affect our health long term. So I just want to point that out as well.
Yeah, good point.
That is a great point. Very, very good point. I wouldn't even have thought of that.
I'm feeling it now because most of the work that I do on my phone, like it's I'm getting old, but it's my neck and my back, and I'm just like, man, the children having to do this for so many years prior to even entering the workforce.
Yeah, and a lot of children don't understand those mechanics that you just described.
Yeah,
because I always have to tell my 14-year-old daughter, put the smartphone down and do your work. She says, I am doing my work, on the smartphone. You have a computer in your room.
Yeah.
Use a computer. But, before your eyesight gets like mine and, before your body gets like mine as a 48-year-old, you don't understand that these things have long-term consequences. So you're right about that.
Yeah.
And I just want to also ask, this is kind of like a pivot, but what are some of the initiatives that the NAACP is working on to create, to bridge these gaps and create more equity, whether across like education policy or organizing, et cetera?
Yeah, so we have quite a few initiatives. So we have our AXO program. We developed a STEM component to the AXO program, which used to be focused primarily on the arts. But now we have a STEM component that's becoming more and more robust, and we have a lot of tech partners who have taken some interest in that. We also have we're also building up relationships with HBCUs, and I'm continuing some of the work that I did before I got to the NAACP on looking at how HBCUs could be a solution to this. About half of the HBCUs have computer science programs, many of them ABET accredited, and a lot of HBCUs are situated in communities that are predominantly Black. So if we look at, Jackson State or Southern University or Morgan State, Howard, a lot of these HBCUs that have very good computer science programs are in these Black areas, and in areas with, unfortunately, a lot of educational disparities and that don't have the type of computer science curriculums that they need. So, through the NAACP, I'm picking up on some of that work on positioning HBCUs to be training sites for teachers to get certified in computer science. So those are a couple of things that we're doing.
Nice. And earlier you were talking about, the opportunities that tech presents itself, to start thinking of teachers in different ways, what it means to be a good teacher. So just the word opportunity was sticking in my mind. So I'm hoping, could you maybe expand a little bit more on what other opportunities that this presents, like for students, either at a collegiate level or K through 12? What are the possibilities that we can, think of, hope and imagine?
Yeah, so I think the possibilities are enormous. And there's a model for reimagining the teacher workforce and reimagining education that I was developing right before I got to the NAACP. But I have some students and contemporaries that have picked up that work. But it was a model that was based on what I call humanistic distributed agency for the teacher workforce. And this is a model that's based on getting the data that we need from teachers directly from teachers and allowing teachers to have more autonomy to do the things that they believe would be in the best interest of students in exchange for sharing data so we could understand what works best. So right now we have a top-down approach. So we have central leadership. Central leadership, they set standards. These standards are passed down to the unit leadership, the principals, which pass that down to the teachers. So teachers are operating under standards of practice that was set by people who are disconnected and removed from the students. Um, the hierarchical approach is something that is archaic, I believe, and it also mimics a lot of stratified systems in society that lends itself to a lot of racial bias and sexism, all types of things. Um, with technology, if technology is used effectively, technology can. There's a concept called cognitive augmentation. So technology can make us all smarter, right? A lot of us have had that experience where we couldn't think of the name of an actor from a movie, and then we just pull out our smartphone and put in some clues, and voila, we have the name. Teachers can use technology to augment the things that they can't readily retrieve through their memory. So through cognitive augmentation, we don't have to just focus on the smartest teachers. We could focus on the nicest teachers. We could focus on the humanistic quality. So that's where the humanism comes from. So through humanistic distributed agency, so it goes from standard of practice to standard of principle. So we don't want all the teachers to do the same things because they don't have all the same students. So teachers have to do different things, and the variance in what they do actually helps us to help them to perform better. But we need them to have the same principles. We need them to have the same ideas. We need them to all understand that every child deserves a shot, to understand that inequities are a problem and should not be tolerated, that children need to be encouraged, not belittled. It's those are types of things we need to standardize, the principles, not the practice. And as teachers are able to do the things that are in the best interest of students, and there's all kinds of technology that can be pulled into this, that can give teachers autonomy. I've talked to teachers, and not being able to transport their students in their cars are a problem because they're dealing with students, they're working with students who, they can either get home on time, or they could either make the last bus, or they can participate in this extracurricular activity.
Yeah.
And so a teacher wants them to participate in the extracurricular activity and thinking, if I could just drive this child to the train so that they don't have to worry about the bus, then they can participate in this. but the rules are saying that they can't.
Yeah.
But yet we can hop in the Uber. We go with strangers all the time, but we can't go with our teacher.
Yeah.
But it would be so easy to create a technology that that lets us know when a child is in the teacher's car, the exact route that they went, when they exited the car. So it's just a lot of things that we can do that releases teachers from this burden
Mm-hmm.
of you got to get them prepared for this test. You have to, all these absurd standards that we have.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I just think you bring up so many great points just about the limitations on teachers. And if I'm being honest,
Mhm,
I can't recall, but it's like
mhm,
so many teachers did break that rule for to give students like extra tutoring after
mhm,
school. Like, yes, like I will take you home. I'll make sure you get there. I'm building those relationships with parents, but just so many other things even in relation to what you were mentioning earlier about computer science being a necessary topic, there are so many things teachers aren't able to teach because of what technology is currently focused on, reaching
mhm,
certain standardized testing goals, and even a lot of the technology that is ready made for classrooms is made in alignment with archaic standards for
mhm,
learning, meaning we have these, and it's been a while since I've been in a classroom, but we have these literally ready-made gaming platforms, studying platforms, flashcard platforms that are all aligned with these textbooks about European history or American history. And not that these things aren't important, but things that are not necessarily preparing students for the workforce. Like I talk
mhm,
so much, especially with my background being in African American studies and even having psychology as a backing as well. There are so many other subjects in the humanities that could be required
mhm,
courses that would make for a better society, make for better and more capable individuals and more evolved individuals to enter society to make change. However, what our learning standards are based on and what our current educational technology is based on are these things that don't have the great, I'm not going to say they don't matter because education is important, but don't have the greatest impact on how prepared our students could and need to be,
mhm.
especially Black and brown kids.
Yeah.
Definitely. Um, and you bringing up, workforce made me think about tech inequity for, young people who are striving to have different career opportunities. And I was, as a creator, as an influencer, Lynae, I wanted to touch on or ask if you could quickly touch on, how tech inequity also impacts Black creators. The internet literally doesn't move without Black creators, but yet some can still struggle with lack of access to creative tools or equipment. And, we can't talk about tech inequity in this space without also talking about, inequalities that impact them. So, in your work, how have you seen tech inequity also impact Black creators?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the same thing for me, and even in addition to some of Ivory's points, it's access to tech, it's access to knowledge, and it's also affordability. When we're thinking
Mm,
about Black creators, we have young Black creators, of course, but we begin to think about like young entrepreneurs, millennials, even some Gen X, some Gen Z, who are a little bit older, who might not have the safety net of technology at school available for them to use for creative purposes. And Black people as creators have been making the world of art to go around this globe since the beginning of time, influencing things, Africa being the birthplace of everything, even civilization and art and culture. And so Black people not having access to these things definitely creates this gap in what they're able to advocate for themselves for in creative spaces to even acquire audiences, to get the attention with the proper equipment, with guidance on how to strategically market themselves and or to develop their own presentation and approach to their content to garner audiences. And so I think just like we're asking for our kids in school, we're going to need people to do the thing. I just wrote a script about inequity the other day, and people love to jump to the gun. The lazy eye, the low bearing fruit is calling equitable solutions affirmative action, or playing favoritism or reverse racism, without understanding the context that equitable solutions are created specifically to expedite the process of leveling the playing field. And so what that is going to look like is special attention to areas that have been abandoned or disregarded. And so we will need these companies, these firms to take a special interest in Black creators, to provide products, to provide mentorship, to provide funding. I've seen quite a few in my brief career as a social media influencer. Facebook has a program with We the Culture where they take a class of creators every year and they provide them funding for, you know, an agreed amount of content. I just saw that Snapchat is partnered with a company called 523 where they are giving funding, where they are giving mentorship, where they are giving strategic courses to help remedy specific issues Black creators face, like even shadow banning, like the algorithm. If we want to talk about tech inequity, we can talk about Mr. Algorithm. And just also, even as Ivory was saying, getting more people in the field of computer science to work on these algorithms, because people love to say, oh, this computer system can't be racist. It can absolutely learn racist behaviors. It can absolutely want to cater to the majority of society's feelings or sensitivities around specific content and bury that type of content in timelines. Exhibit A. But even to push it away from a personal perspective, my own experiences, these are things Black creators have conversations about all the time. And while all inequity for Black people in every arena has valid critiques, especially in the realm of social media and content creations, it is Black creators' work that are fueling the engagement and the trends that run the numbers up for these platforms like TikTok, like Meta, like Snapchat. And so we need to pay these creators. We need to give them the opportunity to get on that level playing field, so they can get on that level paying field as well. But yeah, it's just about valuing the people that are putting in the work and making change and making waves rather, to influence the growth of these companies.
Thank you. And now I kind of want to talk about, you know, other community efforts that are happening to bridge the divide as well. So we've talked about companies having to pay creators, create ways for them to do their work. You know, companies creating access for students and for schools as well. And so, as I was preparing for this event, I came across this project called Black Power, and it's set up in the Bronx. It's this they created this project to set up like free or to low cost Wi-Fi on a roof of a neighborhood for access. And it just made me think a bit about, you know, what other community efforts can be taken, you know, because corporations do need to care, but
Yeah,
they don't always do that, you know? So I just thought, what a powerful effort, you know, to just take it into your own hands and get folks in the neighborhood the Wi-Fi that they needed. And so, you know, I just wanted to ask both of you if you've seen any work like this, whether in Atlanta and DC, any efforts kind of like this, or other like grassroots initiatives. And yeah, if you haven't, it's fine. But I was just wondering.
Yeah, I run into efforts all the time. I haven't cataloged them though, so I can't say who the players are the names of them. I have a cousin that started the app, so he was always looking for opportunities, and there were quite a few out there. One of the issues is that Silicon Valley remains the seat of power, and there's certain you know, it's a fraternity, and there's certain things that get you in, and so but there are Black entrepreneurs out there that are trying to create Black innovation hubs and tech hubs to compete with Silicon Valley, and so I think that, you know, if they keep pushing forward and if we support them, then they can take off. There's also I've noticed a lot of people, Black people abroad, particularly from Africa, who are getting deep into the NFTs and cryptocurrency space. And I think that with this Web 3.0, this entire new way that people will use the web, and the web is supposed to be the web of the future, is not going to be about copying material and sending it to other people, but it's using blockchain technology to actually have ownership of what you create and share. And I see a lot of Africans that are already deep into that. I bought my first piece of art with cryptocurrency last week from
Ooh, okay.
an artist in Nigeria. But when I go to the NFT marketplace, and I've gone to the NFT marketplace mostly to discover new artists, um, and these are people who are selling tokens, through cryptocurrency, and most of them, like a low price would be $500, and some of them are getting up to $50,000 or more for one piece of art through selling these tokens. um, and through looking at some art that I like, I'll just connect directly with the artist on Instagram or through social media. And I was able to use $200 in cryptocurrency to buy a digital file of a piece of art that I like and print it to canvas and framed it. But I think a lot of these things is happening at the kind of a grassroots level, is going to be our best opportunity to have these community-based initiatives like you described. Uh, but technology moves so fast, and we talk about a digital divide, um, and just to wrap your mind around a divide that happens with something that's growing exponentially. When something grows in a linear way is bad enough. Linear looks like that. And we tend to think about technology as a linear growth, but it's actually going like that. It's an exponential growth because of the law of accelerated returns. So a gap today could be here, and a gap 5 years could be here
Absolutely.
instead of here to here. It's not an incremental. So we all have to really be vigilant in how we grab on the technology.
Absolutely. Yes, somebody is going to have to really sit me down and explain it because I'm still not quite understanding. I haven't even gotten on the Bitcoin train yet. I know I'm late, but I'm literally waiting on someone to explain it to me before I spend my money anywhere online. But to answer the question about local things, I'm kind of in the same boat. I haven't cataloged them, but I do know there to be several programs for young adults. I have little brothers, so I'm still kind of in the know of things that are going on. But like STEM and STEAM programs being brought to different schools to partner with kids, and STEAM being science, technology, engineering, and math, and then STEAM being science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, because Black people will be doing the creative things in all different types of subject areas. So definitely we'll look out for those. If you get a bulletin of things that come by you, there are definitely several programs for coding for Black boys, coding for Black girls. Things that I've seen in Georgia, my partner actually, he works in a charter school, and his whole family is employed in different charter schools. And because of I forget the name of it, but it's basically the Charter School Foundation for Georgia. They are working with, I think it's called Inspire Up, I think, when I looked it up, to bridge the digital divide happening for students. So there are a lot of opportunities for our youth. There's also this app. I know people have seen like the neighborhood app, but there are also apps. I forget what this one is called, but just Google these type of things. Google is our best friend. We mentioned being able to put in clues to find movie stars and actors. Google is your best friend. And by grace, it is in the palm of your hand. Like, just Google keywords to see what comes up. But there's an app specifically that allows families or children to post things that they need, different wish lists, and then people in communities to provide what's on that wish list, whether it be technology, whether it be access to Wi-Fi, different libraries being open to the public specifically for Wi-Fi purposes. So, there are definitely so many different iterations that are connecting to our community pillars that you can find access to. And as Ivory also noted, so many Black entrepreneurs who are making waves. So, as I said, Google is your friend. Facebook is your friend. Facebook Marketplace will have services you didn't even know existed. So I just really encourage people to use the technology that they have to look into community opportunities to help bridge the digital divide.
Thank you. And we have about 13 minutes left, so I'm just going to open it up to questions. Let's see what we have from people. So here is a question from the audience. How should developers be thinking about building projects with kids with older, perhaps passed down devices? Then the secondary question is maybe old operating systems or old browsers. How should developers be thinking about building these projects? It's a bit of a difficult question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a developer,
Right.
so I think I would go back to Lynae and say Google is your friend. But you probably find better responses on Google than with me.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do know that there's some people who take older computers and break them apart because especially with younger children, to see a motherboard is something that I think empowers them, and it helps them when they go to other computers to know what's inside of it.
Absolutely. And then too, I think there's, again, I'm not a developer either, but there's so many opportunities to learn what's missing. And when kids get language to understand what's wrong with the problem, they can have better language and ideas of how to solve it. So similar to what Ivory was saying about breaking the computer apart, we're just looking at applications that are on the computer and talking about what specific things could improve this program that might be available on others, but what is this one missing? And this is also jogging the innovative and creative mindset of students. So
definitely. And then here is another question. Lynae, I believe this is specifically for you. What are some specific steps you'd like to see platforms take to protect and support edupreneurs, such as yourself, or specifically Black creators in their work?
Well, I think one thing to note is that technology, especially social media, can be such a powerful tool because everything we put out is free and consumable by the public. There is the challenge of sharing resources, making sure information is credible. So I do think these apps that are becoming super hubs, instead of not instead of, in tandem with attempting to make sure they have all the different uses that other apps might have, like as you see Meta doing a lot on Instagram to give people different outlets to use creatively, integrating different applications to make it easier for people to attach maybe blogs, to give different educators opportunity to have their materials available and accessible to the public without having to do so much, hey, follow me here or check out this over here, just making these platforms all inclusive. And also maybe putting some individuals behind these sensitivity controls, and amping up Jedi training for these individuals who are monitoring sensitivity controls, because minority educators are going to put out content that is deemed sensitive because it goes against the grain of what the majority would like to hear, what the majority feels comfortable discussing. And so when they put up these alerts, was this content sensitive to you, or how did you feel about watching this? All they're doing is adding data points to content without the context of what that content has to offer. And so these minority educators who are putting out this free content are doing so out of the goodness of their heart. They're not asking the public to pay them. They may get these brand deals, which is awesome compensation and a show of value. But what happens when they're partnering with these brands who want to come to them for their engagement? Their engagement is off because of all of these reported posts or whatever, what have you. So I do think there needs to be an additional touch. Algorithms are great as far as trying to make sure everything's running and they might be taking some folks' jobs, but I think it's important to keep that human touch, because even as Ivory was explaining with teachers and technology in general, there's always going to be a need for teachers. There's always going to be a need for humans in place to actually have discernment over how technology is working. We can't just try to make these things obsolete, because that's how we continue to create inequity. Like, inequity is a human problem which needs to have human solutions.
Exactly. Thank you. And, just before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask both of our panelists if you have any final words that you would want to leave the audience with, things to think about. We've discussed a lot about what we could take away with, our steps to bridge the digital divide, but just wanted to open up the floor for, any final words.
I guess my final words would be that and this is a theme that I think ran through a lot of what I was saying, but it's it's tough to think about these gaps that we have, and it's when we think about the digital divide and access inequities and disparities, but I do think that it's important for us to really understand the solutions that come with technology, and to sometimes when we talk about too many problems, we end up in a state of inertia, and this is definitely not a time to think that way. Um, there are so many Black people out there that are doing some amazing things in the tech space, and there are so many opportunities for our young people, no matter what school they're in. There's opportunities for them to learn things that we could have never dreamed about learning about when we were children. And so it's just important for us to understand that we're in this fight. We haven't lost. We're in this fight. I wouldn't even say we're behind. We're in this fight, but we have to keep fighting.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I think I feel like we've said all that needs to be said about this topic, but I just would really encourage people. I mentioned earlier and didn't really finish the thought that unfortunately it's still a two-way street. Like, we can ask for all the help that we want to ask for, and rightfully so, but it does also take us being vocal about the things that we need. It does take us reaching across the aisle to ask to make space for things that are needed in these communities. And so, utilize these social platforms. There are so many groups, Atlanta metro area moms, and I'm just using that as my example, but like different metro area groups on Facebooks that we can pose questions in, that people have so many connections to, and yeah, man, like we have to speak up for as much as we need, as much as we are asking for the things. And while it's not our responsibility to remedy these issues, we're going to have to engage.
Thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you so much to our panelists and the NAACP for your partnership. So as I mentioned, this is a 3-part series, and on March 2nd, we're going to host the final event, which will touch on algorithmic bias, which we already alluded to today. There's a lot that needs to be going on, and data practices, and especially how, surveillance impacts Black communities, but we will get to that. But once again, thank you all so much.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Can I show my art?
Oh!
That's the first piece of art that I got with cryptocurrency.
That's
cool.
Printed the canvas and framed it directly from a Nigerian artist, Yanga.
That is beautiful.
Out on Instagram.
That's very cool. I haven't even gotten into this either, and I know.
Yeah, I need a breakdown. It's like every time I ask what it is, they're like, "Oh, it's art you can buy on the internet," and I'm just like, "I can buy art on the internet. So what do you mean?"
Listen, there are guides that people have sent me, and I will send them your way.
Yeah, we can talk after this.
Okay.
Yeah, I explained to somebody, and they told me that was the best explanation. They might have just been trying to gas my head up, but
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you both so much for joining, and thank you to all the people who tuned in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.